There is perhaps no revelation considered more significant and no revelation more blasphemous than this. Miquella the Kind is a monster. His journey represents the logical extreme of the desire for bodily autonomy in the lands between. A radical pursuit born from the inherent failures of the status quo. Born as an Empyrean twin to Malenia, he was cursed from birth with eternal childhood, a physical limitation that neither the Golden Order nor its rigid fundamentalism could remedy. This failure of the existing religious and biological structures forced Miquella to seek alternative modes of existence, eventually leading to a total divestment of his original self in a desperate flight from the divine shackles that defined him. He found that the grace of gold and the laws of the Erdtree were insufficient to treat his own curse or his sister's Scarlet Rot, prompting him to reject his father, Radagon's Golden Order, entirely. In response, he attempted to grow the Haligtree as a new world tree that will replace the Erdtree, creating a sanctuary for those rejected by the Golden Order, such as the Albinaurics and the Misbegotten. To further protect his lineage, he developed the Unalloyed Gold to ward off the meddling influence of outer gods, signaling a clear intent to free the body from celestial influence and pave the way for an order built on pure compassion. In his pursuit of godhood and freedom from the greater will, Miquella followed a path similar to Ranni the Witch, but took it to a further physical extreme. While Ranni shed her flesh once, Miquella systematically abandoned every piece of himself in the land of shadow. Throughout the realm of shadow, Miquella left crosses where he discarded literal parts of his anatomy, his doubts, and even his love. He abandoned his other half, Saint Trina, marking a physical split in his identity that mirrors the Marika and Radahn duality. By the time he attained godhood, Miquella had discarded his heart and his flesh entirely, becoming a soul seeking to impose a new order of compassion without the weight of his original physical form. Miquella's ability to compel affection and his eventual ascension can be traced back to the origins of his mother, Queen Marika. Marika belonged to the shaman people, whom the Hornsent believed possessed a unique affinity for melding with others. This tortured flesh of the shamans was historically used in jar rituals to create sentient amalgamations, essentially taking the cycle of death and rebirth into the hands of mortal men. Miquella utilized this ancestral affinity not for physical melding like Godric's grafting, but for a spiritual melding, binding the hearts and wills of others to his cause as he shed his own physical constraints. While Miquella sought to leave his body behind, his sister Malenia remained a prisoner of hers. Unlike Godric, who participated in grafting by choice, or Miquella, who shed his form by choice, Malenia's body was a battlefield for the Scarlet Rot, an unwilling modification imposed by an outer god. She maintained her identity as a swordswoman through prestigious gold prosthetics, using artificial means to hold together a body that was actively being consumed by death and undeath as a disease. Ultimately, Miquella's final divestment serves as the ultimate act of rebellion against the hand of God. By leaving his flesh behind, he hoped to become a god who, unlike the greater will that offers only a shitty voicemail, would actually answer his subjects. In the study of Golden Order fundamentalism, the law of regression serves as the gravitational pull of the soul, acting as the essential tenet that all things yearn to eternally converge. While Miquella and Malenia represent a radical divergence from the Erdtree and the traditional Golden Order, their journeys are actually a tragic illustration of this law, a desperate attempt to find or create a new center of gravity when the old one has been revealed as rotted from the beginning. Miquella's ultimate divestment is not merely an escape from his circumstances, but a ritualistic application of the law of regression in reverse, where he seeks to return to a primordial state of innocence by shedding the shackles of his Empyrean flesh. By abandoning his other half, Saint Trina, Miquella mimics the physical manifestation of dual identity seen in Marika and Radahn, attempting a divergence intended to allow his divine aspect to ascend without the mortal weight of doubt or love. This pursuit of a complete being, free from the celestial influence of outer gods like the Scarlet Rot or the Greater Will, led to the creation of Unalloyed Gold.
Well, this is a marvel indeed. the work of a true artisan, a meticulous, bold craftsman who grasps the essence of life.
A material intended to preserve the integrity of the self against external taints. Furthermore, his attempt to grow the Haligtree was a search for a new cycle of life, a vessel where the rejected, those with body image issues or cursed forms, could finally converge and be reborn into a righteous and fruitful existence. While Miquella attempts to converge toward a state of pure compassion, his sister Malenia is the victim of a repellent convergence forced upon her by the Scarlet Rot. In her case, the body becomes a host to a disease that acts like a pox, seeking to meld her flesh with the essence of a different outer god. This represents the dark side of the law of regression, where all things yearn to converge not into a unified, autonomous self, but into a grotesque amalgamation of decay and transformation. Her gold prosthetics are far more than simple tools. They serve as a prestigious prosthetic barrier and an anchor that prevents her identity from diluting into the rot. These limbs represent her personal agency and her will to impose autonomy over a body that is being forcibly transmuted by an outside force. The struggle of these siblings is deeply entwined with the humble origins of their mother, Queen Marika, specifically her history as a shaman village girl. As descendants of this lineage, they inherit an affinity for melding with others, a trait that the Hornsent once exploited by stuffing shaman maidens into jars to create artificial amalgamations. The game highlights a massive amount of agency over the body through how this inherited trait is used. While Godric uses this affinity for the misguided and twisted union of physical grafting, Miquella utilizes it to compel affection, creating a spiritual melding of wills that forms a family out of his followers. Ultimately, both twins prove that identity is a massive part of the struggle in the lands between, as Miquella chooses to shed his body entirely to save his soul, while Malenia sacrifices her soul to the rot to keep her body fighting for her brother's ambitions. In many ways, the overarching narrative of Elden Ring serves as a profound meditation on the tragic burden of divinity, the cyclical trap of memory, and the subjective power of artistic interpretation. When the Tarnished finally breaches the Erdtree, the revelation is not one of triumph, but of a metaphysical horror. Marika the Eternal, the world's supposed god, is found crucified and shattered, serving merely as a hollow vessel for the Elden Ring. This object, the engine that dictates the laws of reality, is the true master, and Marika hangs as its prisoner. Her divinity was never inherent. She was simply a container for a divine beast housed within a dual-natured body. To truly conquer this entity, one must strike with a weapon capable of lightly twisting time, using a temporal tool to revert the Elden beast back to its base form, as ruin is often the only way to escape a godhood that ends in ruin. This cycle of divine imprisonment and the inevitable decay of an order is further illuminated by the journey of Miquella the Kind. I believe Miquella represents a desperate attempt to avoid his mother's fate by divesting himself of everything that defines him: his golden flesh, his strength, and his very destiny. Just as Marika's body was a vessel for the ring, Miquella seeks to die for the sins of the past and be reborn, following a path of seduction and betrayal that began long ago in the realm of shadow. He appears to have inherited the shaman trait where flesh melds harmoniously with others, a biological fact that led to the horrific jar experiments by the Hornsent, but one that also allowed him to host a second self, Saint Trina. I have started to theorize that while Miquella pursued his godhood, Saint Trina has been guiding the Tarnished from the shadows. I've looked at the world as a piece of art where the placement of flowers and butterflies serves as a dream language. While most associate the nascent butterfly with Miquella's stunted growth, I believe it actually marks the trail of the discarded Saint Trina, leading us toward the truth of the Haligtree and the Chapel of Anticipation. I find it fascinating that Ranni the Witch is so deeply tied to the concept of sleep, which Saint Trina's clerics spread as a balm and a teaching. Ranni puts Kaylee the merchant to sleep when you first meet her, and she warns you not to disturb her mother's rich slumber. Just as Saint Trina's lore speaks of the velvety sleep, I believe Ranni may be working on behalf of Saint Trina's agenda, which is revealed to be the assassination of Miquella to prevent his ascension to a caged divinity. The followers of Miquella, such as the poisoner Thalir and the merchant Moor, act as mirrors to this tragedy. Thalir, who views himself as weak as a kitten, finds his only purpose in the velvety sleep of Saint Trina and would sacrifice everything to hear her voice again. Moor, whose armor is made of verdigris strengthened by rust, represents the strength to protect others, yet he is left sad forever when Miquella's enchantment breaks. These characters demonstrate that Miquella's charm was the only force holding their internal grudges and pains at bay. I believe the most critical revelation occurs in the Garden of Deep Purple at the bottom of the fissure, where Saint Trina's nectar has granted eternal rest to the putrescence below. There we find the discarded love Miquella abandoned to reach divinity.
Godhood would be Miquella's prison. A cage divinity is beyond saving.
She begs the Tarnished to kill Miquella and grant him forgiveness. This suggests to me that Miquella's intended age of compassion would have ended in the same ruin as Marika's Golden Order. Ultimately, the story does tell us that to truly make the world a gentler place, we must confront the memories of the past and accept that sometimes the only way to save a soul from the cage of divinity is to end the cycle entirely. By looking at the seduction and betrayal of the past and the obsession Saint Trina can inspire, we see a world where love itself can lead to betrayal. The tragedy of Miquella the Kind lies in the terrifying gap between his reputation and his reality. In the lands between, where the landscape is scarred by the arrogance of gods, Miquella is often framed as the sole exception, a tragic figure of pure intent. However, a rigorous examination of his actions reveals a villain who is not merely morally gray, but fundamentally malevolent in a way that is uniquely insidious. Miquella is an evil misunderstood to be good, largely because he possesses the ultimate weapon of the tyrant, the power to redefine love as a form of total biological and spiritual submission. He likely never saw himself as a monster, because his natural gift for compelling affection ensured he never faced a single moment of genuine resistance. He lived in a hall of mirrors where every reflection was a smiling face he had authored himself, creating a feedback loop of divine narcissism that rendered him incapable of recognizing the horror of his own methods. This moral rot is most visible in the failure of the Haligtree, which served as a prototype for his promised age of compassion. While the Haligtree was marketed as a sanctuary for the downtrodden, the Albinaurics, the Misbegotten, and those abandoned by the Erdtree, it was built upon a foundation of fundamental dishonesty. Miquella attempted to bypass the natural order by watering the tree with his own blood, yet the result was a twisted, stagnant husk that eventually succumbed to Malenia's Scarlet Rot. This is the recurring pattern of Miquella's supposed kindness. He offers a temporary palliative that addresses the symptoms of suffering while ignoring the soul. His followers were protected, but they were also stripped of their autonomy, effectively becoming human-shaped lilies in a divine garden. They were not saved. They were merely placed in a state of arrested development, a theme that echoes in Miquella's own eternal childhood. The age of compassion is, in truth, an age of brainwashing, a spiritual lobotomy on a global scale. While the cessation of war and cruelty sounds like a noble goal, the price Miquella demands is the total erasure of the individual self. All human progress, introspection, and the healthy resolution of conflict are born from struggle. By removing the capacity for disagreement, Miquella removes the capacity for personhood. We see the horrific evidence of this in his band of followers in the Land of Shadow. The moment his great rune shatters and his charm is lifted, the compassion vanishes instantly. The followers do not find themselves healed, they find themselves lost, regressing immediately into old traumas, murderous impulses, and bitter loyalties. This proves that Miquella's grace was never a cure, it was a gag. It suppressed the darkness of the human heart without ever resolving it, proving that his peace was nothing more than a shallow and forced silence. Perhaps the most damning evidence of his villainy is his treatment of Saint Trina. In his ascent to godhood, Miquella did not just shed his flesh, he discarded his heart, his love, and his doubt. By abandoning Trina in the depths of the stone coffin hole, he effectively performed a self-inflicted amputation of his conscience. As Trina herself warns the player, Godhood would be Miquella's prison. Without the capacity for doubt or the vulnerability of love, Miquella ceased to be a savior and became a celestial machine, a cold, logic-driven entity that views the world as a problem to be solved through absolute control. He recruited the martial might of promised consort Radahn, not to protect the people, but to enforce a peace that no one is allowed to decline. In the game's final moments, the mechanic of the heart-stolen grab is the ultimate meta-commentary on his character. When your life bar drops to 0, it isn't because of physical trauma, but because the you that existed before, the tarnished who fought for a different vision of the world, has been erased. You are alive, but you are no longer living. You are a puppet in a golden, dreamlike haze, a ghost in a world ruled by a child god who confused the silence of a grave for the peace of a kingdom. Miquella is not a tragic hero. He is the most dangerous kind of villain. The one who kills your soul while telling you that he loves you. Yet, to truly understand the weight of Miquella's spiritual tyranny, we must first examine the alternatives he sought to replace. Miquella viewed the various paths toward the Elden Throne not as solutions, but as different flavors of the same stagnant failure. To see the whole picture of why he felt he had to discard his flesh, his love, and his sanity to build a new world, we have to look back at the traditional endings. We must analyze how the different mending runes, those primordial blueprint, a sort of factory settings of reality, specifically change the tax policy of the lands between. Only by deconstructing the bureaucratic cages offered by the other lords can we understand why Miquella believed his age of compassion, despite its soul-crushing cost, was the only way out. The throne endings of Elden Ring, I think, function as a series of administrative adjustments to the fundamental laws of reality, rather than a true liberation. When your tarnished chooses a mending rune, they are essentially deciding which specific tax policy or societal logic will govern the lands between for the next age. These endings do not dismantle the cage of divinity, they simply redecorate it. While characters like Leda and Mohg believe Miquella could be a savior far beyond what a tarnished lord could ever offer, the game reveals that even a kind ruler must eventually face the stagnation of their chosen order. The Age of Fracture serves as the default administrative policy. I think of this as a period of absolute monarchical power where the tarnished rules without a specific ideological mandate, leaving the world fractured and the tax policy to be written on a whim. It is a return to the status quo, but without the divine certainty of Marika's original reign. In contrast, Goldmask's mending rune of perfect order represents a bureaucratic extreme. This policy aims to eliminate the fickleness of gods and men entirely. In my opinion, this creates a perfectly efficient but stagnant world where the law is immutable, ensuring that the Golden Order continues indefinitely regardless of the suffering it might cause. We see more specialized and arguably more punitive policies in the other mending runes. The mending rune of the Death Prince. This policy, championed by Freyja, introduces a Sunrealm revival, where those who live in death are integrated into the world's legal framework rather than being hunted. This is a radical shift in the social hierarchy, where the undead and worshippers of ancient dragons gain a second chance at ruling. The mending rune of the Fell Curse. I believe the Dung Eater's policy is the most horrifying, as it equalizes the world through universal defilement. By ensuring everyone is born as a hornsent, haunted by spirits and plagued by painful protrusions, he effectively creates a world where everyone shares the same miserable fate. What I find most striking is how these political choices relate to Miquella's divested divinity. Miquella attempted to step outside these administrative choices by shedding himself of his golden flesh, his strength, and even his own fate to be reborn. He sought an age of compassion to banish the pain of the unloved. However, as Saint Trina reveals, this too was a trap, and that Miquella must be killed to be granted forgiveness. To her, Miquella becoming a god would only lead to another ruinous age like Marika's. Ultimately, The choice of a mending rune is a choice of which flavor of imprisonment the world will endure. Whether we pick the poison of Thylir, seeking eternal sleep as an elixir for life's weight, or the rigid protection of Mor's verdigris, we are still working within a system where someone must be the vessel for the Elden Ring. In my view, the game's more radical endings are the only ones that acknowledge this cage and seek to burn it down or move it so far away that it can no longer dictate the lives of those left behind. In my opinion, the seduction and betrayal Miquella mentions is the key to understanding why his own ascent to Godhood was doomed to replicate the tragedies of the past. Long ago, the Hornsent beckoned Marika through their gate of divinity, only for her to later descend upon them with fire and torment. I think Miquella's journey in the realm of shadow is a direct, yet flawed attempt to die for the sins of the past by divesting himself of everything that made him a child of that golden order. He abandons his golden flesh, his strength, and even his fate. However, the most profound betrayal in Miquella's story is the one he commits against himself, the abandonment of Saint Trina. I believe Miquella's use of a charmed army provides the perfect example of how his age of compassion was actually built on a foundation of coercion. To reach the gate of divinity, Miquella didn't just inspire followers, he enchanted them, compelling even those who would be at each other's throats to unite in his service. Consider these examples of his charmed allies. Thylir, a man who describes himself as weak as a kitten and thick as 2 planks, yet masters deadly poisons on Miquella's behalf. Mohg, a character who traffics with the forager brood and finds joy in providing for Miquella's outfit, even though he later feels abandoned and lost when the enchantment breaks. Needle Knight Leda, an oath-seeker who believes Miquella's age of compassion is worth any cost, even the culling of those she deems undeserving once the charm fails. The tragedy, as I see it, is that Miquella abandoned his love, Saint Trina, to rid himself of doubt and vacillation so he could become a god. Yet, in doing so, he threw away the very thing that could have offered salvation to those who cannot be saved. As we experience the same fall into the fissure that Saint Trina did, we hear her lost voice through the velvet sleep. Her message is a chilling parallel to Marika's fate. In my view, Miquella's betrayal of Saint Trina mirrors Marika's betrayal of the Hornsent, because both were willing to sacrifice their other self, or their original community, to achieve a higher order. Saint Trina, who is Miquella's other half, ultimately pleads with the Tarnished to kill Miquella. I think she realizes that for Miquella to truly be kind, he must do it so, absorbing the hatred, not hiding it under the rug. While Miquella is claimed to have intended a gentler world, he chose to pursue it by discarding the very part of himself that made such gentleness possible. Although the two share plenty of parallels, this is where the split between them becomes clearest. Miquella tries to shape himself to fit a perfected order, even if it means cutting away parts of who he is, whereas Ranni does the opposite, breaking away from the very system that demands those sacrifices in the first place. Miquella's tragedy lies in his obedience to cosmic tradition, a stark contrast to Ranni's audacious abandonment of it. Both oppose the Golden Order, but through wildly different forms of revolution. Miquella is, in essence, following the pre-written script of Godhood, repeating the very rituals Marika once carried out at the Gate of Divinity. According to the orthodox means of ascension, the would-be god must offer a lord, shed their physical form, and relinquish all ties to the mortal realm. This process is punishing and exacting, built to ensure that one divinity is seamlessly replaced by another. For this reason, Miquella's approach is the conventional path, a legitimate, well-regulated transfer of divine authority. Ranni's path, by contrast, is a work of heretical innovation. Rather than entering the established pipeline of divinity, she simply stepped outside it. By slaying her Empyrean flesh and binding her soul to a doll, she circumvented the entire succession mechanism. Ranni does not seek to become the next Marika. She intends to remove the source of order altogether, carrying it beyond the world's reach. Where Miquella builds anew, improved cage, Ranni burns down the cage primordial. This divergence reveals the true difference in their compassion. Miquella's compassion is intimate, interventionist, and ultimately smothering. He believes a god must be present, guiding, and actively shaping the world toward peace. In doing so, he inherits the same flaw that doomed Marika, the necessity of serving as a singular, absolute authority. His compassion is the love of a parent who never lets the child leave the house, protective to the point of control. Ranni's compassion is distant and liberating. By refusing the traditional path of divinity, she spares the world from the oppressive intimacy of godly intervention. Her Age of Stars is cold and lonely, yet it grants the lands between the freedom to determine their own futures, even if those futures lead to uncertainty or suffering. Where Miquella sacrifices his heart to reshape the world into a better cage, Ranni sacrifices her identity to leave the world without a warden at all. Miquella fears what humanity will choose when left alone. Ranni accepts that choice as the necessary cost of autonomy. His compassion seeks to shepherd the world, while hers seeks to release it. Yet, for all their differences, both paths confront the same ancient machinery of ascension. And this is where Radahn enters the story. Following the primordial instructions of divinity requires far more than an Empyrean and a gate. It demands a lord to embody and enforce the new order. For Miquella, this role was never intended for the tarnished. It was reserved for Radahn, the lion of the battlefield. In the orthodox blueprint of godhood, the god provides the vision and the grace, while the lord provides the strength and the vessel to impose that vision upon the world. Miquella's selection of Radahn was not merely born of childhood reverence, but stemmed from ritual necessity. Radahn possessed the might, the ambition, and the soul of a true conqueror, an ideal consort to safeguard Miquella's fragile age of compassion. By resurrecting Radahn in the body of Mohg, Miquella satisfied the final mechanical requirement of the rite, effectively inserting the last component needed to power his divine ascension, while Ranni's cheat involved the sacrifice of her flesh to preserve her spirit's freedom. Miquella's adherence to the traditional manual required the systematic destruction of his own soul. To follow the path laid out by the greater will, Miquella had to become an empty vessel, a process that necessitated the abandonment of everything that defined him as a person. Ranni's path was one of preservation through subversion. She kept her cold, calculating mind while losing her body. Miquella, conversely, kept his body, or a reconstructed version of it, but lost his mind's ability to waver, which in human terms means the ability to feel guilt or second-guess the morality of his actions. This is the dark side of following the standard path. The instructions don't just teach you how to be a god, they teach you how to stop being a human. By following the primordial instructions, Miquella unwittingly inherited the fatal flaw of the Erdtree, the need for absolute, central authority. Ranni understood that as long as a god is present and tangible, they will inevitably become a tyrant or a target. Her cheat was designed to break the cycle of godhood entirely by removing the divinity from the reach of the people. Miquella, by sticking to the script, simply restarted the cycle. He believed that because he was the one on the throne, the results would be different, but the mechanics of his power remained identical to Marika's. He would be the sun, and the world would be his shadow. His compassion became a new version of grace, a light so bright that it left no room for anything else to grow in its own way. In doing so, Miquella did not merely ascend to godhood. He meticulously followed a divine blueprint, constructing a new golden cage, a framework of absolute order. Yet, for all his pursuit of cosmic precision, the plan would unravel in ways he could not foresee. The deeper I dig into the shifting lore of the lands between, the more I realize that Miquella's disappearance from the Haligtree is far from straightforward. The event, famously hinted at in the game's opening cinematic, shows the Lord of Blood, Mohg, abducting the Unalloyed from his sanctuary, an act that sets in motion far-reaching consequences. However, we now have a wealth of further context regarding this event that helps us make sense of the timeline and exactly how this tragedy came to pass. Prior to the release of the DLC, I had thought that Miquella was simply stolen from his slumber while Malenia was away in Caelid fighting Radahn, a perfect opportunity for Mohg to snatch the vulnerable Empyrean while he was cocooned unconscious, and his greatest blade was abroad. However, thanks to the revelations in the realm of shadow, we now know that this isn't the case, and that Miquella was surprisingly active during the aftermath of Radahn and Malenia's catastrophic battle. We learn this from Freyja, who served as one of Radahn's personal guards. During the battle, she became afflicted with the Scarlet Rot and fully expected to die in the swamp. Yet, it was Miquella himself who came to her in the battle's aftermath and took mercy upon her. Freyja recalls being stricken by Rot in Aeonia, feverish and in great pain, entirely resigned to death after being left behind. She notes that only kindly Miquella was good enough to seek her out, despite her wound being swollen, festering, and exuding a pungent odor. He drained the poison from it. I find it fascinating that Miquella, using his warding powers of Unalloyed Gold, was able to pull the rot from her body and cure her. To me, this is another clear act of kindness and empathy that we can attribute to Miquella, a god who noticed a singular, obscure warrior and saved her from a slow, agonizing death. Of course, when weighing everything up, we must remember he was the one who ordered Malenia to Caelid in the first place, meaning Freyja's condition was a direct consequence of his own strategic actions. Even so, I still think it speaks volumes about his character that even as a demigod, he takes the time to care about the fate of a single soldier. Returning to the timeline considerations, this proves Miquella was indeed still operating following the Battle of Aeonia. However, I believe his abduction still likely happened in the same general way, taking place only when Malenia was incapacitated. We know from the ashes of the Cleanrot Night Finlay that Malenia fell into a deep slumber following her battle with Radahn, likely rendered comatose by the unleashing of the Aeonian bloom. It would be during this specific period of her weakness that Mohg would come to the Haligtree and abscond with Miquella, taking him to the Mohgwyn Palace. I am convinced that Mohg was directly charmed by Miquella, a fact confirmed by Ansbach, who mentions that in an attempt to free Lord Mohg from his enchantment, he challenged Miquella only to have his own heart rather artfully stolen. Now, some people believe that Mohg's actions, kidnapping Miquella and the other horrors he committed, were not his own actions at all. They argue that Miquella had him charmed from the very beginning and thus Mohg isn't even guilty of the kidnapping. I do not believe this to be the case. I still believe that Mohg kidnapped Miquella of his own volition. Why? Because otherwise, Miquella could have just walked into the Mohgwyn dynasty and charmed the Lord of Blood if he had planned to use him from the start. Instead, we see Miquella being actively kidnapped. It makes sense that the Omen would seek the Empyrean out, as Mohg needed a god for his coming Mohgwyn dynasty. Since the charming effect of Miquella doesn't fully obliterate a person's core personality, it is likely that the aim of raising Miquella was Mohg's own idea. It's just that Miquella began directing Mohg to do his bidding, making the Lord of Blood believe he was advancing his own aims when he was actually advancing Miquella's. My suggested chain of events is this. Miquella witnesses the aftermath of Aeonia, revives Freyja to win her fealty, then returns home and enters his cocoon state to attempt to enter the realm of shadow. It is at this stage that Mohg breaks him out and takes him away. I speculate the fluid we see on Miquella's body in the palace is a direct indication that he was prematurely broken out of that cocoon. Malenia's armor makes reference to her brother keeping a promise to her, and I believe that promise was simple, that he would succeed Marika and become a god who would institute an order to banish the influence of outer gods, including the rot that afflicted Malenia her entire life. It is clear from the base game that Miquella has a disdain for uncaring gods who meddle in mortal lives, and thus he wants to usher in an age of compassion. In cut dialogue, Miquella gives a speech that closely mirrors Ranni's, announcing an age of our Eden, a 1,000-year voyage guided by compassion, where love encompasses all. I find this fitting because Ranni and Miquella are essentially proposing different solutions to the same problem: the selfish machinations of the gods. Ranni would solve this by removing divinity from the mortal plane entirely to oversee an order of cold logic from a distance. Conversely, Miquella's order would be one of direct love and compassion, forging an order based on care for all subjects. To become this pure god, however, he needed to find a means of ascension and cleanse himself of the sins of his mother, Marika. The realm of shadow offered both. Leda tells us that Miquella was deeply concerned with the beginning of Marika's rule and the betrayal she committed to become a god, as well as the obliteration of the Hornsent at the hands of Mesmer. Somehow, he knew of these inherited sins and wanted to shed his ties to the Erdtree to start again free of that legacy. I believe he cocooned himself to pass over, but when Mohg kidnapped him, he saw a unique opportunity. Ansbach says Miquella used Mohg to reach the realm of shadow, an extraordinary feat given how difficult it is to break into that sealed realm. By allowing his golden nature to be tainted by Mohg's blood, he found a way to slip through the veil into the dumping ground of the dead. He left his broken body behind and re-emerged in his original form in the shadows, leaving a deluded Mohg to cradle a corrupted husk. In that view, I guess Miquella didn't exploit an innocent Mohg. He simply beat a monster at his own game. Miquella didn't use Mohg's body out of cruelty, but out of a desperate, cold logic. Having run out of options, he treated his brother's corpse as nothing more than a spare part, a hollow shell needed to hold Radahn's soul. To a child trying to fix a broken world, the flesh was just a tool, repurposed to finish the job. However, in the lands between, the flesh seemed to remember. By anchoring the radiant, indomitable spirit of Radahn within the omen-cursed husk of Mohg, Miquella fundamentally compromised the sanctity of his new era. The Age of Compassion, intended as a realm of unalloyed grace, was instead birthed through the dual desecration of his kin. One brother harvested for his spirit, the other for his skin. Miquella may have followed the primordial instructions of divinity to the letter, but in his rigid obedience, he crafted a godhood already shadowed by the corruption of its own foundation. The use of Mohg's body introduces a profound irony into Miquella's new order. Mohg was a victim of the very exclusion Miquella once sought to end, an omen born in the sewers, hidden away because his blood was seen as a defilement of the Erdtree. By utilizing Mohg's corpse, Miquella included the omen in his new world in the most horrific way possible. By turning a person into an inanimate resource, even as Miquella's light shines from Radahn's shoulders, the blood that flows through those veins is the blood of the formless mother, a power rooted in wounds and fire. This suggests that Miquella's age would never have been the peaceful era of velvet sleep he promised. It would have been an age built on the foundations of the accursed blood, ensuring that the violence Miquella sought to banish was physically woven into the DNA of his new lord. This final act of Miquella's plan exposes how his primordial logic ultimately fails. He believed that if he followed the ritual correctly, the purity of his intent would override the impurity of his materials. He viewed the reviled Mohg and the legendary Radahn as mere components in a machine. This is the hallmark of Miquella's descent. He became so focused on the 1,000-year voyage that he stopped seeing the horror of the ship he was building. A god who can look at the mangled, horn-stubbed corpse of one brother and see only a suitable container for another has already lost the very compassion he claims to represent. It proves that by the time Miquella reached the gate of divinity, he was no longer kind. He was merely an architect, building a monument to a love he had long since discarded in the abyss. The final battle, where the tarnished must act as the lord of the old order. The final confrontation at the summit of Enerilum, I feel, is not a battle of good versus evil, but a clash between two incompatible visions of the future. As you step into the light of the gate of divinity, you are not merely a warrior. You are the lord of the old order, the final obstacle to Miquella's dream. Miquella clings to Radahn's back. A golden phantom whispering promises of a gentler world, but the tarnished sees the truth that has been obscured by his radiance. We see the body of Mohg, the discarded heart of Saint Trina, and the thousands of charmed souls left in the wake of this kind god. To allow Miquella to ascend would be to allow the world to be lobotomized by a child who cannot handle the pain of reality. Our role is the most painful of all. To be the one who says no to the dream, shattering the golden cage before its bars can be fully forged. When Miquella finally falls, there is no grand explosion of darkness, only the faint settling of dust and the return of the shadow. In his death, we fulfill the secret wish of Saint Trina. We grant him forgiveness. By ending his life, we save him from the eternal prison of divinity and the cycle of corruption that began with Marika. Miquella dies not as a god, but as a boy, finally reunited in the silence of the grave with all the things he tried to throw away. The age of compassion ends before it can truly begin, leaving the lands between in a state of fractured, painful, but ultimately free existence. We are left to wonder if a world of suffering is better than a world of forced peace, and as we stand over the remains of the most tragic figure in history, the answer is written in the blood on our hands. To grasp the essence of Miquella, one must perceive him as a failed savior. He emerges as arguably the most poignant tragedy in Elden Ring, driven by intentions of unalloyed purity that inexorably warped into acts of profound monstrosity. He is no sneering, cartoonish antagonist. Rather, he is a prisoner ensnared by the very idealism that curses him. Yet this portrayal leaves me persistently troubled by a single, nagging inquiry. From where did he derive his profound notion of compassion? It seems clear to me that Miquella's focus on removing the influence of outer gods was born directly from the trauma of watching his sister suffer. To me, he saw a person he loved being used as a mere pawn by uncaring cosmic entities, and he rightfully loathed them for it. This is why I view Unalloyed Gold as a profound condemnation of the Golden Order. Miquella sought to create a purified version of reality because he believed the existing one was fundamentally tainted by divine interference. Because of this, I find it entirely natural that he rejected the cruel dogmas and prejudices of his parents' era, specifically the systemic hatred directed at the Misbegotten, the Albinaurics and Godwyn, the Prince of Death. The murder of Godwyn's soul by Ranni was, in my opinion, a catastrophe that condemned one of the greatest demigods to a fate worse than death, becoming a soulless, warped husk. I see the resulting deathroot and deathblight as a tragic infection that corrupts all it touches, creating those who live in death. While the Golden Order fundamentalists, those extremists led by Radahn, view these beings as abominations to be eradicated without mercy, I see them as victims of a broken system. I see Miquella not as someone who turned a blind eye to the failures of the Erdtree, but as a son who tried to fix the damage caused by his own family. He gave a home to the Misbegotten and the Albinaurics, offering them a future in a world that had always treated them as disposable. His kindness extended even to the most tragic cases, like Godwyn. When I look at the golden epitaph sword, which carries the humble prayer of a young Miquella, it's clear to me that his grief was real. He didn't want to destroy those who live in death out of hate. He wanted to grant his brother a true death, so he could finally be at peace. To me, his use of last rites wasn't a punishment, but a final act of mercy for souls that were never allowed to rest. This drive to repair his family's broken legacy shows that Miquella's entire worldview was rooted in a deep love for those the world had cast aside. Though he started as a brilliant student of his parents' religion, he eventually abandoned the Golden Order when he realized it had no answer for his sister's Scarlet Rot. He saw that the Order was built on a foundation of exclusion, labeling anyone who was different, like the Omen or the bloodless Albinaurics, as cursed. In response, Miquella created the Haligtree to be a place where the unwanted could finally belong. For Miquella, compassion was about making sure no one was ever persecuted just for being born. This dream for a better world turned into a cold obsession when Miquella traveled to the realm of shadow and discovered the horrific truth about his mother's past. He found the remains of her people, the shamans, who had been butchered and stuffed into jars by a rival culture. This revelation convinced him that the entire history of the world was just an endless cycle of betrayal and revenge. He decided that the only way to truly save everyone was to break that cycle once and for all. To do this, he adopted a radical logic. He believed that all suffering comes from conflict, and all conflict comes from the human will, our ability to disagree and fight. This perspective transformed his power to charm others into his greatest tool for peace. Miquella believed that if he could compel everyone to love him, they would finally stop hurting each other. In his mind, taking away a person's free will was a small price to pay for ending war and bigotry forever. He truly felt that a world of mindless peace was better than a world where people were free to be cruel. He wasn't trying to be a tyrant. He was trying to be a doctor who removes the ego like a cancer that was killing the world. To prove his commitment to this goal, Miquella didn't just demand sacrifices from others. He tore himself apart first. He threw away his eye, his arm, his blood, and eventually his very heart, represented by Saint Trina, to rid himself of any human doubt or desire. By the time he reached Godhood, he felt he had died for everyone's sins, shedding his humanity to become a pure engine of kindness. In his own mind, he couldn't possibly be a villain because he had given up everything he was to save a world that was too broken to save itself. I do think Miquella's empathy was fairly sincere, driven by a genuine heart rather than any hidden agenda. We see this in his partnership with Castle Sol, where he attempted to use the power of the eclipse to find a cure for the soulless demigods. Even though this endeavor ultimately failed, it reinforces my belief that he truly cared for Godwyn's plight. To me, Miquella stands as a merciful lord who was brave enough to stand up for the oppressed and attempt to undo the wrongs of Queen Marika. Ironically, I see him as Marika's clearest successor, even as he built a city and a tree, the Haligtree, that stood in direct opposition to her Erdtree. While the grace of the DLC guides us toward a confrontation, the base game suggests that Marika herself was distressed by his abduction. I suspect that even she recognized Miquella as the most suitable heir, and the sight of his fall at the hands of Mohg would have been a source of genuine sorrow for her. Though his Haligtree never truly became an Erdtree, Miquella succeeded in something I find even more impressive. He gathered one of the most powerful and loyal militaries in the lands between. His gracious nature was so compelling that it even drew the noble knight Leda to his side, as she sought a home for the oppressed Albinaurics. To me, winning the loyalty of such a principled individual speaks volumes about the true depth of Miquella's character. The more I look into the soldiers that Miquella commands, the more I find myself unsettled by the sheer, terrifying depth of their devotion. His foot soldiers don't just fight, they literally detonate themselves in a display of self-destructive loyalty that honestly haunts me. I have to ask myself, how could a being that is truly good allow, or perhaps even encourage, his followers to commit such horrific acts of self-obliteration? This is where the mask of the kindly Miquella begins to slip, revealing something much more sinister beneath the golden surface. When I read the description of the bewitching branch, it tells me everything I need to know. He hasn't just earned the love of many, he has learned exactly how to compel it. I find the mechanics of this charm to be one of the most fascinating, yet repulsive, aspects of his power. It isn't a crude tool that turns people into mindless, drooling zombies. Instead, it is a subtle, surgical strike on the soul that preserves the individual's personality while overriding their loyalty. We see this perfectly in Ansbach. He remained himself, yet he was convinced his devotion to Miquella was entirely natural until the spell finally broke. It is a terrifying thought that your very sense of self can be preserved even as your free will is quietly steered by another. To me, the fact that this power is rooted in Unalloyed Gold is the key to understanding his true nature. In this world, Unalloyed Gold is a symbol of absolute purification, and I've come to realize that Miquella is not a god of love in the way we understand it, but a god of searing, white-hot purity. He uses love like a blade to shrive the hearts of men clean, and frankly, I find nothing more frightening than that. As Ansbach so chillingly puts it, Miquella's purity wipes away a person's true emotions and replaces them with a singular focus on him. I feel that we shouldn't view this as a corrupt power of domination, but rather as an extension of an overwhelming, uncorrupted light that simply incinerates anything in its path, including human motivation. It is purification in its most literal, violent sense. He obliterates the bad in people, but he burns away the good right along with it. While the end result might look like typical tyranny, the distinction matters to me. Miquella doesn't want to rule your will. His nature simply erases it. He is so pure that his light leaves no room for the complexity of human individuality. And as we look toward his journey into the Land of Shadow and his dark history with Mohg, we must keep this nuance in mind, all while also to understand that none of these are in absolute ideas and could all change depending upon one's perspective. The question of why Malenia would march across the continent to wage a devastating war against Radahn has long been one of the greatest mysteries of the base game. Until now, we assumed their epic clash in Caelid occurred simply because they were the two mightiest demigods remaining, a notion supported by the game's original story trailer. However, the revelation of the vow provides an entirely new context for this duel. When Malenia bloomed in Ionia, she whispered a specific murmur into Radahn's ear. Miquella awaits thee, O promised consort. This reveals that her role in the vow was to defeat and ultimately kill Radahn to trigger the next stage of Miquella's plan. In the DLC, Miquella expresses gratitude to both his loyal blade and us, the champion of the festival, for helping him achieve his goals. This is a direct reference to the fact that Miquella's plan for Radahn's resurrection required 2 deaths. Malenia fatally wounded him with the Scarlet Rot, and we finished him off during the Radahn festival. Miquella's use of the plural R when discussing the vow suggests that Malenia was a primary partner in this pact, expecting each party to fulfill their specific bargain. Malenia's part was to best the general in battle, a task she pursued with such fierce loyalty that she was willing to rot an entire continent to ensure her brother could eventually keep his promise to ascend and create a gentler world. This raises the question of why an honorable warrior like Radahn would consent to a vow that required his own death. One possibility is that Radahn, being a warrior of unparalleled strength, offered this as a challenge. If Miquella and Malenia could defeat him in combat, he would submit and become the king consort. From Radahn's perspective, this was a win-win scenario. If he survived, he could pursue lordship on his own terms, but if he died, Miquella's vow acted as a divine insurance policy, granting him a second chance at life and lordship in his prime. This framing helps explain why someone who idolized the martial prowess of Godfrey and Radahn would accept such a deal. It offered him the chance to become a legendary lord while regaining his youthful strength. The timeline of these events also becomes clearer through the story of Freyja. She recalls being left for dead in the swamp of Ionia, only for kindly Miquella to seek her out and drain the rot from her wounds. This suggests that Miquella was physically present in Caelid following the battle, witnessing the devastation firsthand. His act of saving Freyja might even be interpreted as a small gesture of remorse for the blood of the soldiers shed during the conflict he orchestrated. Regardless of the cost, Miquella's designs moved forward. Once we defeated both Radahn and Mohg, the path was cleared for Miquella's agents to use Mohg's body as the vessel for Radahn's reborn soul. The Lord Consort we eventually face in the DLC is a reflection of Miquella's idealized memory of his brother. Radahn at his peak, yet fundamentally changed. Because he occupies Mohg's omen body, we can see physical signs of this corruption, such as omen horns emerging from his arms, and he is even able to unleash the blood flame power of the formless mother. While it is Radahn in spirit and soul, this reborn lord is something entirely new, standing as the final obstacle in a plan that Miquella may have been guiding since the very beginning of our journey. This convergence of souls and bodies represents the final, staggering step in Miquella's quest to rewrite the laws of the world through a calculated ritual of resurrection. Yet, while the mechanical logic of this ascension is anchored in the secret rite, the choice of the general over other fallen demigods has sparked an unprecedented debate among those who have long followed the young Empyrean's trail. It is here, at the intersection of Miquella's success and the community's expectations, where the narrative begins to feel like a sharp departure from established lore. The apotheosis of Miquella the Kind remains the most divisive chapter in the history of the lands between. A narrative turn that feels to many like a frayed tapestry, where the threads were pulled from a loom no one saw being built. While my own journey through the shadow of the Erdtree was defined by a sense of unalloyed wonder, exploring the verticality of a world that seemed to swallow me whole. Intellectual honesty demands we acknowledge the discord within the community. For a significant portion of the audience, the resolution of the promised consort lacked the foundational blueprint we have come to expect from Software, leading to a profound sense of dissatisfaction with how Miquella's story was presented. This frustration is rooted primarily in the sudden elevation of Radahn to Miquella's chosen, a development that seems to ignore years of established logic pointing toward Godwyn the Golden as the focus of Miquella's fraternal devotion. This perceived fracture in the lore stems from the fact that, in the base game, we witnessed Miquella's desperate, failed rituals at Castle Sol and his mourning in the Haligtree, all aimed at granting Godwyn a true death. Radahn, by contrast, appeared to be a stranger to Miquella's heart, linked only by the bloody stalemate with Malenia in the wilds of Caelid. To mend this gap, the expansion attempts a grand, retroactive stitching of their destinies through artifacts like the young lion's armor and the remembrance of a god and a lord. These items suggest that Miquella's admiration for Radahn was not a recent desperation, but a childhood fixation on the Starscourge's unique synthesis of strength and kindness. This revelation reframes the entire shattering, transforming what we once viewed as a simple war of succession into a celestial kidnapping where Malenia marched south not for glory, but to harvest Radahn's soul for her brother's ascension. The mechanics of this ascension required a terrifying alchemical transformation, as a god in this world requires a lord to ground their divinity. To facilitate this, Miquella performed a spiritual lobotomy on himself, shedding his flesh and his humanity to emerge in a deified form, while Radahn was granted a second life within the omen-cursed vessel of Mohg. However, the central tension of this union lies in the nature of the vow mentioned by characters like Sir Ansbach and Redmane Freyja. If Radahn had truly agreed to this arrangement in his youth, the brutal conflict in Caelid remains a glaring contradiction. While a darker interpretation suggests Miquella used force and charm to enslave an unwilling soul, the earnest pleas heard in Miquella's final memory, where he begs his lord brother to honor the pact, suggest a more complex, mutual agreement that was somehow derailed by the chaos of the shattering. Ultimately, the problem is one of Radahn's absolute silence, which creates a dirge of information that haunts the final hours of the expansion. Because we never hear Radahn's voice or understand his internal motivations, we are forced to navigate a maze of theories. Perhaps he demanded a warrior's death before submission, or perhaps the mad taint of his great rune drove him to break his promise. This lack of clarity is precisely what fuels the consensus that Miquella is a villain who used his power to charm a dead man against his will. In the absence of a concrete explanation for Radahn's participation, the heart-stealing grab becomes the ultimate metaphor for Miquella's reign, a godhood that offers a gentler world only at the cost of the individual's soul, proving that even the most radiant light casts a shadow that no one can fully outrun. Does he understand his own doing? The loss of self, the central question of Miquella's journey, is whether he truly understands the weight of his own actions, or if he has become a victim of his own process. This represents a critical turning point in his narrative. In his earlier years, Miquella likely grasped the gravity of the sacrifices he was making. But as he systematically divested himself of his physical and spiritual parts to enter the gate of divinity, he inadvertently destroyed his internal compass. By discarding Saint Trina, he discarded his capacity for doubt, the very thing that makes a person pause before committing an atrocity in the name of a greater good. Without Trina, Miquella ceased to be a person and became a cold, logical engine for salvation. By the time he stands at the gate of divinity, he is a being of pure, blinding light, incapable of seeing the individuals like Thalir who suffer or those like Leda who murder in his name. He is so blinded by the radiance of his 1,000-year voyage that he can no longer see the blood on the path. This leads to the complex debate regarding his innocence, which remains a sympathetic but firm no. There is a strong argument for his innocence based on his curse of eternal youth, which infuses his plan with a sense of childlike naivety. Children often think in the same dangerous absolutes as Miquella, believing that if everyone simply loved one another, the world's problems would vanish. He is innocent in his initial intent, yet he remains guilty in his execution. Miquella is a genius who knew exactly how to manipulate Mohg, how to lead his followers to their deaths, and how to lobotomize the world's free will to achieve his goals. He consciously chose to kill his own humanity to save the world, making his descent into godhood a calculated act of self-mutilation. The compassion Miquella offers is therefore the compassion of a benevolent tyrant, built on the idea that a world without conflict is a world at peace. He operates under the belief that removing pain is the ultimate mercy, yet he fails to see that by removing struggle, he also removes meaning. This is why Saint Trina describes his godhood as a prison, not just for Miquella himself, but for every soul caught under his spell. He remains a victim of his own curse. The curse of never being able to grow up and realize that happiness cannot be forced. This state of arrested development ensures that a kingdom founded on enchantment can never be a home, only a beautiful cage that mimics the very golden order he once sought to dismantle. The young Ribis, Miquella and the architecture of the shadow. To understand Miquella is to understand the twin, not merely as a biological fact of his birth alongside Malenia, but as a metaphysical cage he spent his entire existence trying to escape. In the lands between, duality is a law of nature. The sun and the moon, the gold and the silver, the flesh and the spirit. Miquella's tragedy lies in his attempt to solve the great divide of the world. By amputating the half of himself he deemed unworthy of godhood. The alchemical failure. In the hermetic traditions that underpin the Golden Order, the rebus is the end product of the great work. A unified being of male and female, solar and lunar. Marika and Radahn achieved this, yet their unity was a fractured one, hidden behind a veil of light that blinded the world to their internal conflict. Miquella sought to perfect this, born with a yang, soul of unalloyed gold but trapped in a yin, body of eternal childhood. His life was a series of failed experiments in balance. The Haligtree was his first attempt to grow a new world order from his own blood, a shimmering silver mirror to the Erdtree's golden tyranny. But as the writing suggests, the flesh does not forget. The rot of his sister and the stagnation of his own form were not bugs in the system. They were the shadow of his own light. When the Haligtree failed, Miquella realized that to become a god, he could not simply grow, he had to descend. The psychological amputation. Miquella's journey into the realm of shadow is a literalized Freudian nightmare. If the realm of shadow is Marika's psychological dirty laundry, Miquella enters it not to clean it, but to add to the pile. To achieve the unalloyed purity required for his age of compassion, he began a systematic process of discarding. He abandoned his ego, his lineage, his ID, his doubts and fears, and finally his other half, Saint Trina. In discarding Trina, Miquella performed a spiritual lobotomy. He sought to become a god of pure light, forgetting the fundamental truth that light defines identity only through its contrast with shadow. By throwing his love into the deep purple depths of the stone coffin fissure, he ensured that his alleged compassion would be a hollow, mechanical force, or a language of light that commands obedience rather than inspiring it. The final act of Miquella's ascension is the ultimate utilitarian ingenuity. To ground his radiant spirit, he needed a lord, a yang to his yin. His choice of Radahn's soul was a pursuit of cosmic precision, but his choice of Mohg's body was a calculated exhaustion. By anchoring the indomitable lion within the omen-cursed, blood-soaked husk of the Lord of Blood, Miquella created a fractured reflection of the very order he sought to replace. He followed the factory instructions of Divinity to the letter, but the materials were tainted. He used the river Styx of the Shadow Realm to bridge the gap between flesh and spirit, but in doing so, he became a usurper of the sun, stealing the free will of his followers to fuel his artificial day. The shape of the light, Miquella the Kind, is the ultimate proof that to see the truth is to lose the comfort of ignorance. He saw the flaws of his mother's world, the stagnation, the broken cycle of death, the exclusion of the shadow, and he tried to fix them with a grand, unified vision. Yet, in his desperate, almost alchemical ingenuity, he fell into the same trap as Marika. He built a new golden cage, one where the bars are made of enchantment rather than iron. He fled the shadow of the Golden Order only to discover that the shadow we flee is merely the shape of the light we carry. In his pursuit of a world without pain, he birthed a godhood shadowed by the very corruption he sought to burn away. The tragedy of Miquella leaves a scar on the realm of shadow that no amount of gold can cover. He was a being of infinite potential who was crushed by the weight of a world that refused to be cured. His story serves as a warning against the primordial instructions of power, the idea that you can build a better world by following the same violent blueprints as your predecessors. Miquella's failure was his belief that he could be a better god than his mother, while still using the same tools of divinity, lord-making, and soul manipulation. He remains a failed savior, a reminder that true compassion cannot be commanded. It must be grown in the messy, unenchanted soil of human choice. As the light of his rune fades, we are left once more in the dark, where the only comfort is the velvety sleep that Saint Trina promised, a rest that Miquella at long last can finally share.
Lord brother, I'm going to be a god. If we honor our part of the vow, promise me you'll be my consort. I'll make the world a gentler place.